talk to Rupert Lowe, MP for Reform UK. Rupert, very good morning to you.
Morning, Mike. How are you?
I'm very well indeed. Thanks very much for joining us. We've got much to do, not a lot of time to do it in. Your press conference yesterday, in which you announced a private prosecution of those men in the fight at Manchester Airport with the police. Tell us a bit about that. How's that going to work exactly?
Well, I think the key we were trying to highlight here, Mike, is how long it's taken to resolve something that should have been resolved very quickly. I mean, I always say good justice is swift justice, and I think this is now 11 weeks in, and people's lives have been put on hold. There's clear video footage which, again, crept into the public domain. Which arguably it should have been there from day one, all of it. It's quite clear what happened in that video. And our view at Reform is that this needs to be dealt with. It needs to be dealt with, obviously, by the IOPC. It's taking too long. And, you know, I think we've laid a marker down that police confidence will be undermined if this is not dealt with quickly, and I think it's unfair on the officers. I equally question why the two people who were clearly guilty of attacking police officers are still walking around on bail, which is quite extraordinary.
Well, we seem to have found ourselves in a very odd place in the judicial world these days, don't we? Because, I mean, you'll even hear people saying, oh, you can't say that they've been clearly seen to be committing an assault, when you're actually watching a video of them committing an assault. Oh, you mustn't say that because it might prejudice a trial. Well, it won't prejudice a trial because you've got the video there. It's been out there for a long time. Has anybody attempted to extract a reason from the CPS as to why they haven't brought any charges yet?
Well, again, I think one can't interfere overtly in the process, but all I can tell you is that in my previous dealings with the CPS, Mike, it moves at a glacial pace, and that is not helpful to justice. I had a situation with the CPS, you probably remember, with Dave Jones, who worked with me at Southampton Football Club. And he was charged on a number of counts of pretty unpleasant things. It took 14 months for the case to be brought. His life was put on hold. And within 2 days, the trial collapsed because the witnesses were considered to be unsound by the judge. Now, nobody at the CPS was held to account for that. Dave Jones had £500,000 worth of costs, which were then taxed. So even as an innocent man, he had costs that he had to pay of £250,000. So I think there are a lot of things that are wrong with the CPS. And one of them is that, as I say, they don't do things as quickly and effectively as they should do, and their staff aren't held to account properly. And I think this is another case of that.
Sure. But, of course, as we saw in the summer, following the riots, they are able to move swiftly if they wish to.
If they decide they want to, as we know, and I think, again, the two-tier policing issue was quite clear with the riots. I personally think the Prime Minister misread the room. I obviously don't condone in any way violence, but I think that the British people are justifiably very concerned about the huge numbers of legal and illegal immigrants who are coming into this country, damaging our way of life, putting pressure on our public services, and effectively affecting the way we all live, which and I think quite rightly people are concerned about that, Mike.
Well, of course. So
and certainly if the government won't listen and it won't do anything about it, I think we've seen the first sort of plumes of smoke from the volcano, and unless they listen and act, things will, I'm afraid, deteriorate. And I think in the end, people have to make their feelings known legally and in numbers, as they did, as you know, with the Great March for countryside rights under Tony Blair, where 1 million people turned up to London. But, you know, arguably in a well-run democracy, that shouldn't be necessary. So I think it's indicative of a government that's out of touch with the electorate.
Well, I think the problem is as well that for years and years and years there have been things that people feel that they couldn't talk about and they feel that they couldn't say and they couldn't address. And so, you know, the more that information was sort of effectively withheld from them, the less happy they were. And yesterday, for example, when we learned that something like 750,000 illegal migrants now live in this country, more than in any other country in Europe, and everyone I've spoken to about it since says it's probably an underestimate. We're probably more like 1 million, could be more like 1.3 million. You know, it's 1 in every 100 people in this country now have come to this country illegally. It beggars belief, doesn't it?
It does, Mike, and you know, you and I have discussed this before. We should have a zero tolerance policy. People who come here illegally should be immediately sent back to where they came from. France is a safe country. They've come through several other safe countries. Under the treaties, we're perfectly within our rights to do that. And I think we should also, like Australia, make it clear that if they come here illegally, they will never, ever settle in this country, even if they apply legally. The right way to do it is to do it legally. We're still accepting far too many legal immigrants. You know, and I think the key problem that we face here is Tony Blair. It all goes back to Tony Blair, Mike, and Gordon Brown. You know, the legislation that they passed with Campbell and Mandelson, which effectively has undermined our constitution. It has effectively undermined Parliament, and we saw that a bit yesterday with this Chagos Island issue. So I think we have to repeal the Human Rights Act. We have to repeal the Equalities Act. We have to get rid of this divisive legislation which was put in place, which was totally unnecessary, which has created division. It's fostered the rise of the Quango. As you quite rightly say, it's meant people are frightened to say what they really think. Yeah. And the essence of a democracy that's at peace with itself is to have free speech in particularly in Parliament, but also in the country. People must be able to say what they think, and that way you actually end up lancing any boil that might grow, and you allow people to then debate things, discuss things, however outrageous people's views might be. That way you get at the truth. And I'm sad to say, we are seeing the minorities drive the majority, which is wrong now, and we've got to address that. That's one of the things that Reform will be addressing. I don't know if you saw my speech at the Reform Party conference.
Yes.
There are things that we need to do as a matter of urgency when we win the next election, which everybody laughs at me, but I think we're going to eviscerate Labour in the same way that we eviscerated the Tories last time. Because from what I can see, Mike, we have a bunch of clowns who have absolutely no idea. I think the economy, they're running the country now, the economy is going to suffer hugely. We're seeing orders basically on hold till the budget. Everybody's frightened of what's going to happen in the budget. Is it pensions she's going for? Is she going to put a % on employers' national insurance? What lunacy is she going to perpetrate on a country that's already overtaxed? Well, in order to fund a bloated, indolent civil service, which ultimately is like a sort of a ton of weight on all of the productive economy's back.
Absolutely.
And I had a great picture. I don't know if you saw my picture at the conference, but there's a great picture of a little emaciated taxpayer pedaling along with a huge bloated state sitting on the back eating a hamburger. That picture says 1,000 words.
Well, the answer to your question as to what she's going to do is she doesn't know the answer to that yet, because she's busy ripping up the budget that she had prepared on the basis that she's now been told by the Treasury that most of the measures she wanted to put in, from non-DOMs to putting VAT on private schools to tax raids on pensions, none of it's going to bear any fruit because it's all a very, very bad idea. So she's now ripping all that up to try and come up with something else.
Well, the schools issue is one I think is outrageous, Mike. I mean, it's driven by class envy. Ultimately, the school system in this country is one of the best in the world, if not the best. Yeah. It's a huge source of revenue for us as people send their students here from overseas. And what she's going to end up doing is driving people who, ultimately people who aspire to achieve, they're going to be driven out of public schools, or private schools. We call them, it's a misnomer, we call them public schools, but they'll be driven into state schools. And I think ultimately it may well cost them money, because ultimately they will have to pay for those places. They're going to effectively put pressure on an already overstretched education system, which means education quality will drop. They're going to damage an industry which is bringing huge amounts of money into the country and paying, those people are bringing wealth here. It's just an own goal, and there's absolutely no logic in it. And why why can't we be driven by logic, Mike? Common sense, logic, and fairness. You know, envy and, you know, one of the 7 deadly sins, why would we allow envy to drive the agenda? It's ridiculous.
It is. And, of course, you know, this is the home of common sense, and one of the things that is going to happen if VAT is imposed on schools is they're going to start claiming some of it back. And so, you know, they've already reduced what they think they're going to get because they never thought of that, which seems incredible. But I want to play you a little clip of something that you'll find very familiar. This was put out yesterday. It's the real opposition, I guess, to Labour. It's Reform's movie. Have a look.
Labour's Britain. Featuring shivering grandparents with no winter fuel allowance, free clothing, glasses, accommodation and tickets, as long as you're a Labour MP. Over 11,000 illegal migrant crossings and counting. And trade unions getting every pay rise they ever asked for, whilst taxes rise for everyone else. Labour's Britain, starring Free Gear Keir.
Pretty slick stuff. The only issue I have with that, and I said this to my producer this morning, Rupert, is why didn't it have your voice voicing it? You didn't need an American voice. Surely Reform should have had, you know, a strong British accent on it.
Well, Mike, it won't surprise you to know that I had very little editorial input into it. It was delivered into my inbox over the weekend by Nigel Farage. And, you know, look, it shows we're moving in the right direction. It raises the issue of these extraordinary gifts from Lord Alley, which, you know, which I think has undermined Labour's credibility. I personally have this bee in my bonnet about the fact that I think Keir Starmer is in breach of the Bribery Act, which is another, I don't agree with it, it's another Gordon Brown heffalump trap, which has meant that the city can no longer take people to the Chelsea Flower Show or to Wimbledon, or take them to other corporate hospitality which might influence their decision-making. Well, don't tell me Lord Alley, who's an openly gay Muslim, who is politically active, don't tell me he isn't going to want to exact some form of influence over Keir Starmer. You know, for paying for clothes and his wife's clothes and glasses and tickets to this and tickets to that. It's quite extraordinary, Mike. And I think if Keir Starmer's in breach of the Bribery Act, then so are most of the front bench, because they've all been
they've all been at it,
having their snouts in the trough, which is quite extraordinary. I mean, the optics of it are absolutely disgraceful.
They are, and the public are absolutely sick to the back teeth of it. Listen, I've got to run. Rupert, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Rupert Lowe, MP for Reform in Great Yarmouth.